the way I think about drones is that they are just one tool in the creative toolkit. And, you start with a drone show and then you add an audio track and it's better.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Just like many fireworks displays have an audio track that accompanies it, it just makes it more impactful. And from there, okay, let's add fireworks and do drones in conjunction with fireworks because they do different things. I mean, fireworks displays can do things that drones cannot, and vice versa. And so I think they're quite complementary. And then from a show production point of view, the more stuff you add, the richer your production is. So let's
Yeah.
add searchlights, let's add lasers, let's add smoke, whatever it is. The more elements a production has, the more impactful it is going to be. And so, drones are just one part of that. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Hello, and thanks again for joining me on another episode of Geezers of Gear. And so today's guest actually is someone I reached out to. I saw an article about him heading up a standards and safety group who are talking about drone technology. And this gentleman happens to know an awful lot about drone technology. So I thought it was going to be really, really an important topic to discuss because drones continue to grow in the business, and there are people who love them. There are probably people who don't love them. There are people who are afraid of drone technology because much of it comes from China, and all kinds of different sides of this conversation. So I really do believe that today's guest is one of the people who is going to be able to answer a lot of these questions very well for us. And so I reached out directly to him, and he was gracious enough to give us more of his time. He has been on the podcast before, so I happen to like him a lot and appreciate when he takes the time to come on. So today's guest, Nils Thorjussen, Executive Chairman of Verge Aero. Nils is a pioneering entrepreneur and technology executive with over 3 decades of experience shaping the entertainment technology landscape. Now, as Executive Chairman of Verge Aero, he's leading the way in drone show technology, making drone entertainment smarter, safer, and more spectacular. He co-founded Flying Pig Systems, creators of the Wholehog consoles, and Element Labs, known for early LED innovations like VersaTube. Nils was last on the show back in 2019. You can check that episode number 65 out on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or at geezesofgear.com. So please welcome Nils Thorjussen. You blue yonder. We're flying into the wild blue yonder. So where are you now? Are you in Park City?
I'm actually in Palo Alto today.
Jesus. I can't keep track of you. I need a GPS on you.
It's a nightmare, but my wife works here in Palo Alto, so I float
so
around. We kind of float back and forth between Park
nice.
City and Palo Alto.
Well, good thing your company is called Verge Aero because it would make perfect sense to have an airplane.
Of course, and I just need a really giant drone to ferry me back and forth automatically all the time.
Perfect. Well, you're
the day
not that
will
big.
come.
You're Scandinavian. You're small. Silly. What a stupid thing to start a friggin' podcast with. So anyways, hello, Nils. Thank you for popping into Geezers of Gear. Again, this is your second time, and I appreciate that.
Well, thanks for having me, and kudos to you. I'm blown away at your at 300 or whatever of
Longevity.
These things. I mean, it's amazing, and I love listening to them from time to time, especially in my car as I drive, and it's so nice kind of catching up with people I've worked with over the years.
Yeah.
And I think you're doing a great industry service. So thank you on
Well,
behalf
thank
of the
you.
industry.
I appreciate that. And if you know anything about me, you should know that I'm really stubborn and I don't go away easily. So, even though it's almost impossible to make any money with a podcast or to come up with any kind of, commercial value, it's something that we really enjoy doing and we appreciate hearing things like that. So thanks. So I actually reached out to you because I had read a press release in a couple of different magazines about this thing you're doing with drone safety and regulation and standards and things like that. And I think it's a great topic. I think it's one that certainly sparked my interest, and I felt like we should have you on to talk about it. Hello, and thanks for joining me today again on Geezers of Gear. Today's podcast is brought to you by Mainlight, your go-to dry hire rental provider, bringing you the latest in lighting and stage equipment, from moving lights and control consoles to truss, LEDs, and rugged IP65 rated fixtures built for outdoor venues. Mainlight have everything you need to make your production shine, whether it be a small theater venue, an outdoor stadium event, or a TV production set. Mainlight is the partner you trust with the gear you want. In addition to rentals, Mainlight offers brand new equipment sales from all your favorite brands, as well as used sales on equipment pulled directly from their rental inventory. All used gear is meticulously maintained and backed by a 60-day depot warranty, ensuring that you have confidence in every purchase. Located in New Jersey, Wilmington, Delaware, Tennessee, and Las Vegas, Nevada, you get the reach of a national rental company with the personalized service of a local provider. Visit mainlight.com today to explore their rental options and request a direct quote through their easy-to-use online ordering platform. So, with that said, before we go there, I actually want to talk about drones in general, because I think, pardon me, something's wrong with my throat today, but I think that everyone has seen some sort of a drone show. Everyone knows what drones are. A lot of us have bought our kids DJI drones that are now sitting in expensive Pelican cases underneath beds and things, which that's my own personal life example. My son thought he was going to be the world's greatest drone pilot for about a minute, and that was expensive minute, and it disappeared. But drones obviously have evolved into much more than that. And these drone shows are not only taking the place of, I think, fireworks in some cases, but they're working alongside fireworks. They're sort of collaborating together as part of an overall show. And I think there are companies out there, I know Pyrotechnico is one of them, who are doing an incredible job of combining drones and fireworks together into, these incredible sort of sky displays or whatever you call them. But with regard to the sort of big picture, are drones like expecting to replace fireworks or just augment, or do they plan to work together in harmony forever? What's the big picture goal there?
Well, I think they're two different things, okay? But I think they're very complementary. The way I think about drones is that they are just one tool in the creative toolkit. And, you start with a drone show, and then you add an audio track, and it's better, okay?
Yeah.
Just like many fireworks displays have an audio track that accompanies it. It just makes it more impactful. And from there, okay, let's add fireworks and do drones in conjunction with fireworks, because they do different things. Fireworks displays can do things that drones cannot, and vice versa. And so I think they're quite complementary. And then from a show production point of view, the more stuff you add, the richer your production is. So let's add searchlights, let's add lasers, let's add smoke, whatever it is. The more elements a production has, the more impactful it is going to be. And so, drones are just one part of that. So that's kind of how I think about it. And in the beginning of drone shows, there was a lot of buzz around, drones replacing fireworks displays. And in some situations that may be true, especially in the Western US where there are fire issues and things like that. But otherwise, I think they're quite complementary. And it's really not about drones or fireworks. It's drones and fireworks in my mind.
Elation Lighting presents the Rebel Profile, a powerful high-output LED moving head with dynamic color mixing with high CRI and rugged IP65 protection. Unleash the untamed power of the Rebel Profile with explosive output, uncompromising precision, and audacious projection that shatters conventions, all in a packed 500-watt package. The Rebel Profile delivers scene-wide color mixing, variable CTO, and a 7-position color wheel with high CRI filters and UV options. Elation's Rebel Profile harnesses powerful visuals with rotating and fixed gobos, dual rotating prisms, and high-speed iris. With an IP65 outdoor rating, it enables designers to create captivating experiences in the harshest outdoor conditions. Featuring a customizable logo plate, the Rebel series lets you brand every moment. Bold, distinct, and unmistakably yours. Break free from the status quo.
You should say that part about replacing them, you know, for whatever reasons, because I actually just had this conversation a couple of days ago. So the town I live in Canada is called Canmore, and it's right next to Banff. And they've got a local government in place right now who has, for the first time ever, shut down Canada Day fireworks. And it's based not on fires, which we have many of. We're in a forest up here. But it's based on wildlife. You know, they think that it's scaring the wildlife and it's causing them anxiety or whatever it's doing. I don't know who's interviewing the elk out there to come up with that that decision, but this is the direction that they've gone. And so I said, have they considered drone shows? And he's like, I don't know, what's that? And this is a connected person, right? And he said, what's that? And I said, oh, let me send you a couple of links. So I sent him some YouTube links. Of course, Verge Aero was certainly in there, and he was blown away. He was like, I didn't even know this sort of thing existed. And I said, now you can even get drones that have pyro as well. And so you can kind of simulate a fireworks show a little better because there is actually some fireworks going on in that show. But the idea is it's a spectacle that you can use to highlight your event or your in this case, birthday of the country. And so, you know, I got a lead there for you anyways. But, you know, I do see that side of it. And also just like, you know, I remember when moving lights first came out, I'm old enough to be that guy. And people just said, oh, well, that's the end of follow spots. And that's the end of, you know, fixed conventional lighting. And that's the end of all of these other things. It's not. It's another tool. Like you said, it's another tool in the toolbox.
100%.
So if you only had drones, people would get bored relatively soon, I would think. Like, yeah, you could watch it for 10 minutes, but could you watch it, you know, for 20 minutes? Could you watch it 10 minutes again the next day? I don't know. Like maybe more so than fireworks, because fireworks kind of do the same thing over and over again. Whereas with drones, you can draw different pictures in different colors and all that stuff. I guess you can with fireworks too. But when you add fireworks, drones, and lasers, and like you said, sky trackers and stuff together, it's quite spectacular.
It is. And, you know, I mean, from my lighting perspective, I mean, I think there are a lot of parallels with the development of automated lighting. And in my opinion, okay, we've made it out of the VL1 era, but we're maybe still only in the VL5 era. Okay. I think it's really, really early days, both in terms of the development of the technology, how people are using them creatively. And I think there's a long way to go before we run out of steam or penetrate all the different, you know, places that could use a drone show like you're just encountering, right?
Yeah.
So there's still lots of work to be done. And even today, looking back at some of the early drone shows, it's kind of like looking back at the VL1 era with like Genesis. And, you know, at the time, everybody was blown away. But if you look at historical concert footage from today's perspective, you look at some of those shows in the 80s and it's like, oh my God, they're so boring, right? And I mean that in no way to offend the people who put on those shows, but, you know, it's just that the technology is what it was at the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it evolves. Well, and I think we're in another one of those moments right now because, you know, whether I go to a country show, a pop show, or a rock show, they're kind of starting to look pretty darn similar. You know, there's not a lot. And you have some unbelievably talented designers out there who do some really cool things with other elements and stuff like that. And so I'm not knocking the design community by any stretch, but I just think that when you start putting 1,000 moving lights on every single show, you do end up with some sort of lack of, maybe, I don't know, it just misses something, I guess. It misses something. Whereas sometimes when you only have a dozen moving lights, you can do a lot more nuanced things. I don't know. What do I know? I'm
Well,
not
I
a
think,
designer.
yeah. Well, I think that's a universal truth, in that, if you get comfortable, you can just kind of skate through and it gets easy. And some of the best shows I've seen are the ones with more constrained budgets, where they've been forced to make do with less, and just like a couple of dozen moving lights, I mean, can do incredible things if you use them appropriately and the setting is appropriate,
Yeah.
right? So
One of my favorite examples is Mark Brickman with he went to not Lollapalooza, Coachella with Neil Young with 16 follow spots. That's it. That was his lighting
cool.
rig. 16 follow spots. And everybody just kind of went, well, what are you doing? And then it was just like wildly complimented, wow, this was so cool, And again, you couldn't do it all the time because people would get bored of that, obviously. But
Sure.
I love those sort of edge cases where somebody tries something completely different and it works, and it's just different, nothing more than that. It's just different. And so, yeah, I think that certainly seeing some of the shows, and again, I compliment Pyrotechnico, maybe because they're doing more marketing than anybody else, but they've done, like, I think it was the inauguration or something to do with government, and I think it had something to do with either Trump's
Yeah, we work with
inauguration or something.
well, there was like a presidential something or another. I can't even remember what the event was
Something,
called.
yeah, but
So
where
yeah.
they had everything going on. They did the sound, the lighting, the video, they did it all. Drones, fireworks, all of that stuff. And maybe you guys were involved on the drone side, but I just thought it was such a cool way to, really just stretch that whole thing out, make it bigger and so much more impressive than just a fireworks show or just a drone show or just not that any of those things, not that I'm belittling anything, but it's just cool to have all the elements. So
Totally agree.
what are the industry constraints? Is it like, what keeps us, you said we're in the VL5 era, what keeps us from going to the, whatever, where we are today in lighting, based on drones? Is it the technology, the brightness of the lights that are on board these drones, the software, regulations? What is it? Mostly.
I don't know that it's anything in particular. I mean, I think we're just at this point in the evolution of the industry where, like, the technology has gotten pretty well sorted. Like, the software works and the hardware works and the systems come together and they allow people to do what they want to do. I think what hasn't happened so much is that people haven't gotten truly creative now exploiting this technology. It actually took a long time to get to where we are today because this stuff is hard. It's a lot
No
harder
kidding. Yeah.
than, it's like the classic exercise in developing a product, and it's peeling the onion, and there are a lot more nuances to developing this kind of system than many others, because you learn stuff in the field that you can never ever predict or emulate, in a lab or even in like your testing area. You just discover all kinds of wacky stuff. And so it's taken a while for us just to work through all of that and create a system that is easy for people to use and safe in all kinds of different situations. So then, we have sort of like this base platform that now we want as many people to use as possible. And I think still just a small subset of designers have actually really tried to push the envelope with drones, because they've been hard to get a hold of, or they've been expensive, or whatever it's been. And it's also more limited where you can use them. Not every venue is going to support a drone show. So, my perspective when I've worked in this industry, it's always been one of creating the tools. And I'm not the creative person. I work with creative people and I watch them do amazing things. And it's kind of the same thing here. So, A key part of that is having good software, and there's probably room for that to evolve. I mean, software became a really important part of lighting, things like effects engines and other tools to help people quickly create shows. And, it's the same thing here. You need to give people good tools in order to be creative. And so, we've just gotten to the point where all of this is now easily accessible to people. And so then, we'll add on bits and pieces as we move forward. People are starting to put lasers on drones. Okay, so maybe that's the next thing.
Oh,
Or
that's
shooting lasers
interesting.
at drones,
Yeah.
or dropping confetti, or whatever gag it is, or smoke on drones. So the FAA had banned, as you know, pyrotechnics, and we finally last year were able to get approval to fly pyrotechnics on drones. So that opens up a whole new avenue, not just for fireworks, but now you can do drone shows during the day because you can do smoke effects, okay? And you could have a fleet of drones like with coordinated smoke or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So, we'll see where that leads us. But I think we just need to see what interesting ideas people have, and then what the tools are they need to achieve those things, and we'll go from there.
Interesting. Yeah, that all makes so much sense. What about things like scale? Like I know or I at least believe that one of the advantages that I think some of the larger Chinese drone companies had, at least early on, was where we were limited to hundreds of drones. Perhaps they were doing thousands of drones in shows, and we've all seen videos and stories of disasters where they all crashed into each other and landed on people's heads and stuff. But certainly is more better when it comes to drones.
Oh, are more moving lights better? I mean, it kind of all
That's
depends,
a very
right?
good response. Good response. Yeah, I like that.
Right. So sometimes, yes. I mean, it gives you more pixels. Okay. And the Chinese have been really good at developing the deployment systems, okay, to strip out labor. I think that's a really important part of the future of this industry. I mean, the Intel system, which is now owned by Nova Sky Stories, they have a similar kind of flying out of the case scheme with built-in charging and whatnot. And streamlining the deployment is important. That being said, again, kind of like moving lights, like you can do a lot with 200 drones. It all sort of depends on what your use case is and what you're trying to do. You don't necessarily need 1,000 or 10,000 drones to make an impact. And even we've done smaller events with 50 drones and had a huge impact, right? So
Yeah.
it all kind of depends on what your goal is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, like some of the other, I guess, differentiators, one of the things that I believe is accurate is that your company, Verge Aero, were or are one of the very few companies, I don't even know if there are others, but who are producing both the software on your own and the hardware. And
Right.
I believe that other companies are using one company's software, maybe their own, and using somebody else's drones, perhaps. What are your advantages in doing that, in capturing it all?
Well, the main advantage, if you do both hardware and software, is it gives you tight hardware software integration. Okay, they work nicely
Apple.
together.
It's the Apple.
So
The
exactly,
Apple
it's
scenario.
the Apple Mac strategy, and that generally gives a better user experience and also enhances safety, which is really important in this industry. And with our second generation drone, we took over development of some components that previously we'd been buying in from the outside. And now we totally control every piece of technology in the system that we deploy. And previously we had like an autopilot component that we would drop into our chassis. And then what we would find is the supplier of that component would make some changes to their firmware or whatever. They wouldn't tell us. And then you get into finger pointing, and it's just really, really messy. So by having full control over your entire ecosystem, it just allows you to more easily deliver a quality product and avoid surprises. So That's kind of where we're coming from. I mean, we went down this road initially simply because when we got started, there's no place to buy anything, right? I mean, there were no drone shows available. I mean, drone show drones available for sale. There was no software available for sale, and so my engineers are like, okay, we'll just do it ourselves. And so obviously that changed over time, but that's why we got started this way, because we simply we were in, this is 2016. I mean, we're starting from, ground zero.
Yeah. So what's the difference between a drone show drone and a drone that I can buy on DJI.com or whatever?
The main difference is no camera, and then you add a light, and then you want to have a little more precise control over what it actually does. So in addition, most drone show drones use something called RTK, which is like GPS enhancement to make it more precise in its location.
So they're not crashing into each other, basically.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So you need kind of like extra communication to transmit that information. I mean, that's the basic differences.
So like, I know that, for example, to sound like a complete idiot, with my son's DJI drone, it was always sort of auto adjusting itself to the wind or to conditions or to, if there was a tree in front of it or whatever. I guess one of the problems would be if multiple drones are flying together and they're adjusting in the wrong direction, suddenly you have a crash, right? And so some of your software, I'm sure, makes them go more in unison than...
Right.
Yeah.
So the RTK is really important because it's super precise. I mean, down to centimeter level accuracy. Wow. And then otherwise, you just need a really good autopilot on board that does what you just described, trying to keep them where they're meant to be.
Yeah. So, like, do you guys have somewhere on a whiteboard, like a pixel pitch that you're trying to hit? Like, is 10 feet or 15 feet or something? Is that a number that's written somewhere, or is that just stupid?
No, that's in the software. We can adjust that. So each drone essentially has a bubble around it, and you can adjust the size of the bubble. And you can be more conservative, or you can be more risk-taking and minimize the bubble size. And like maybe if you are in an environment where it's not very windy and the drones are going slow, you can have a smaller bubble. And if you're being more aggressive, you probably need a bigger bubble. So it all depends.
Right. Interesting. I didn't know any of this stuff. That's why I asked.
That's why we're here.
That's why I ask questions. So, what are other things that I guess differentiate you over some of your competitors? I guess especially North American based competitors, as opposed to, I think most of the really big drone companies are in China right now, right?
Yeah, the really big people are in China, and I mean Nova is pretty big. Again, the company that has the old Intel assets, they operate globally, but they're headquartered in the U.S.
Right.
They're a very big player.
Right. So what differentiates you? Is it still that hardware-software combination, the Mac?
Hardware-software combination, which then gives us greater safety, okay? Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff under the hood that we have done to ensure that what we do is safe and that there's redundancy, okay? And if anybody wants to go to our website on verge.aero, AERO, there's a whole white paper we've written that kind of lays out the details of how stuff works.
Yeah.
For if you really want to get down and dirty, you can read through that. And we wrote this earlier this year because there were a lot of questions around safety and how our system worked, and it was just helpful for us to kind of lay out our thinking and how we do stuff. So if you really want to learn how everything works, that's a great resource. But in general terms, it took us a long time to develop all this stuff, and it primarily was because we were trying to do things the right way and a safe way and not cut corners. And this is a little bit different than entertainment otherwise, because I mean it's akin to aspects of rigging or pyrotechnics, because there's a whole component of safety that's critical to what we do, and a little different from lighting and like video, because you're generally not worried about potentially killing people or maiming them or whatever, if your drones get out of control, right?
Yeah.
So we were really perhaps over cautious and conservative in our development, and maybe it took us longer as a result. And you can even see that in our drone shows. For example, like we're probably more likely to have an auto land of a drone, which means you lose a pixel, okay, than maybe some other systems because we're super cautious. But if we detect any anomalies or anything that makes us, worried, then the drones are programmed to just descend and, stay within their safe flying area. So, I mean, in terms of your original question, in terms of the differentiation, I think those are probably, the main points.
Well, I remember too, and I could be wrong again because I haven't looked up these facts recently, but I remember you are doing your manufacturing not in China, and that became a pretty key point. At one point, I don't even remember who was in office at that time, but somebody, it was probably Trump, was pushing pretty hard to shut down Chinese drones coming into this country for reasons of national security and spying and stuff that is probably happening every day. He believed that basically, and I don't know if there's ever been truth to this, and you might know probably, but he believed that that even DJI hobbyist drones were collecting data and sending it back to the motherland. And so is there any truth to anything that I just said?
Well, I mean, I don't know internally what DJI does or does not do, but those drones certainly have the ability to gather data in terms of where they're flying and transmit it back to a central location. Some of that actually is really useful, important, because we want to keep drones out of controlled airspace, out of military areas and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there have been so many incidents of drones flying in inappropriate locations. So having some control over that is probably not a bad idea. And this is, at the core of a lot of discussion at the moment. And there are definitely going to be changes, within the framework that governs drones in the United States and other countries as we all figure out like what's the right balance and what are the appropriate things to do. So we got shut down from doing one gig on the National Mall, some years ago, because one of our components had a circuit board that was made in China, and even though our drones were made in the U.S. otherwise, and we had full control over the software, right, that wraps around everything, but that one component came from China, and as a result, the Department of Interior prevented us from flying an event.
Interesting.
Which, in that case, that's a bit silly, okay? Because we control all comms, we control every aspect of the system, So that was a bit over the top, but it just highlights the sensitivities around this issue and how people are thinking about it.
So was that a strategic decision for you based on some of those protocols, or was that just the best decision that you thought for your business?
Which decision exactly?
To not manufacture in China.
Oh, yeah, I don't want to manufacture in China.
Yeah.
For a whole host of reasons. So we've always stayed out of China, but we think about this business globally, and so we're still competing against Chinese companies like in Europe or whatever. So one has to be nimble, and I think it's all about balance in terms of where you build stuff and how you build stuff. And it was complicated before, and it's only getting more complicated with obviously what's happening now with the trade wars and everything. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it's a complicated topic, which is why, I don't know, it always interests me. But I remember some of those talks that we had back in those days when it was like, there's a good chance that DJI is not going to be able to import into the United States anymore, and other companies were getting a little nervous about it, and yeah, so it was kind of a thing. I think is your software called Verge Design Studio?
Yeah, so there are a few pieces of software. We have the Design Studio, and then we have a ground station that controls what happens in flight. So those are the main pieces of software. But then there's also obviously software that runs on the drone itself.
So Design Studio is basically where you're creating the show itself, and
correct.
Is that similar to like doing animation or?
Yeah, so I mean, given my background with lighting consoles, I'm a big believer in open standards and being able to talk to everything,
Yeah.
right? So we can you can design inside the studio, you can import things from third-party applications, and then either manipulate them or just, fly that content. But what's great about our system is that it validates everything and makes sure that it is safe to fly. It calculates all the flight paths, and then you can adjust and manipulate in the design studio. So again, from a kind of a lighting perspective, it gives you the aviation equivalents of like a preset focus, or some of these other tools.
Right.
The ability to be nimble and adjust your launch pad on site without things going wobbly, and you can see exactly where your safety zone needs to be, like looking on Google Maps, and all these kind of features that are just really useful for safely and efficiently delivering a show. And so, that probably, I mean, going back to your differentiation question, I mean, that's probably another area where we do have significant differentiation because we've put so much effort into the user experience and trying to make it fast and easy for people to get things into the air safely, right? And then adjust for all of the weird stuff, which very well what production is like, right? And there's always weird stuff that happens, and just giving people the tools to adapt to those things on site. That's all really an important part of the package, because so often, like, little things are the ones that get you in a production environment. You don't have the right piece of gear, whatever that is, which then prevents you from doing something else, and then it cascades. So again, having now done this for nearly a decade and worked through all of these issues, we now have a really robust toolkit that allows the operator on site to efficiently deliver a show, and allows creative people just to focus on being creative without a bunch of constraints.
Well, and what are some of those weird things, like, beyond wind and weather and stuff like that? Like, have you ever had a flock of birds fly into a drone show and cause havoc?
We haven't, but there is another company in this industry that did a gig years ago in Las Vegas, and bats flew out of the ventilation system just as they were taking off, and managed to get caught up in one drone, and
Oh
it
my
went
goodness.
sideways and ended up, hitting a spectator there. So,
Ooh.
so these things do indeed happen.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, I mean, I guess the difference, like, if I'm doing an outdoor festival or something and weather comes in, I got to worry about my lights and certainly the stage and the LED screen. But you might have hundreds of drones in the air that can easily become projectiles, I guess. So you have to have a whole different sense of security and safety.
For sure. I mean, that's really, really important. And, in these production environments, there's always an element of chaos, right? Some are better run than others, but, sometimes you show up and where you think you're going to take off suddenly is the catering tent or whatever it is, or, they don't give you the crew that you've been promised, or they don't give you the forklift that you need to move your gear or whatever it is, and all these things can get in the way of a successful production, right?
I get it. Yeah. No, I mean, we've all seen it. And again, obviously the hope is that it never turns into anything catastrophic where people start getting hurt or worse. So speaking, I mean, we're really sort of hitting the edges of safety and standards. And I was not really surprised, I guess, when I saw the article that you're involved in getting this going and getting it to become a reality. But I think I was kind of happy about it, because it just seemed a bit like a wild, wild west for a while, where anybody could put up a drone show. You could, buy a bunch of drones and put up a drone show if you had the technology. And I believe you guys sell the technology, and I'm sure there's forced training and stuff like that a company would have to take. But is there any reason for the timing? Like, why now? Was there a big accident? Was there a close call? Was there anything that really created urgency for standards today?
So there was an accident in Orlando in December where a drone was out of control and hit a kid. It made the national news, got a lot of press, and afterwards we had a series of conversations with the FAA where they were reaching out, trying to understand better what they should do and how everything works, et cetera. And out of those discussions came a request really from the FAA to get a standards process moving. Okay. And that was a little bit surprising for me because my expectation had been that, okay, the FAA now is going to clamp down and they're going to make a bunch of rules and they're going to specify a bunch of stuff to ensure this never can happen again. Um, and the reality is that Part 107, which is the part of the FAA code or rules that govern unmanned aviation, were set up to be deliberately light touch. That was the mandate from Congress. They're meant to spur innovation, and the FAA is meant to stay out of as much of this as possible. They've created the framework, but they really want industry to regulate itself. And the FAA has said to us, it's like, you really don't want us making the rules, okay? We want this to come from industry because you guys know better in terms of how this stuff works and what it takes to make it safe. And if we do our job and create a good standard, then the FAA no doubt will embrace that. So that's what we're now doing. So after getting that guidance from the FAA, I started doing some research to figure out, okay, what are the standards bodies that might be appropriate for this? I got introduced to ASTM because, as it happens, they're doing a ton of work already and have been for the last year
What is
or
ASTM?
10 years. Oh gosh, I don't even know what it stands for, other than advancing standards and in any case, it is a
trademark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Advancing standards and transforming markets.
Oh, there
Okay.
you go.
Uh-huh. But it is one of the leading standards bodies in the world. It's well recognized. And what's exciting about working with them is there's a whole infrastructure that we're able to take advantage of. So, they already have been doing all this work within unmanned aviation. There are a number of other standards that have already been put in place. They have like editorial support. They have like this whole process, and they have companies involved that are involved in unmanned aviation, people like Google Wing and Zipline and Skydio and all these awesome companies that are on the forefront of drone innovation. So they're part of this. So it ensures that whatever we come up with is going to be sane and logical and make sense from an aviation and safety point of view, because it's going to get approved by these people that come from that background. So that's kind of how we got to where we are in terms of this process.
So were you literally, though, the sort of point of the sword on this? Like when?
Yes.
And so did you have to then start calling around to other drone companies and saying, hey, we want to get you involved in this process? And how did that go?
Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I did. And then I wanted to get the word out. So I've, generated a press release and tried to do my best to ensure that it got exposure in all the right places. And I've had a phenomenal response. I mean, lots of drone companies, drone users, people from all parts of the industry and all parts of the world have sat in on these meetings and participated. And that's really exciting, because talking to some of the ASTM folks, a lot of times these standards groups are small and sleepy and there's not a lot going on. And they are really pleasantly surprised by the amount of participation that we've had so far. So now the key is just kind of keeping that momentum going. And we've identified some of the key issues, and now we just need to start drafting things specifically and then discussing it with this group of people and going from there. But it's really, really important that this is an industry-wide group, and it's not just, my company trying to, make some stuff happen. It needs to come from industry and be broadly supported to have validity and then get embraced down the road.
I completely agree with you. I mean, I know if you look at the rest of our industry, anytime you talk about safety standards or even control standards, control protocols, DMX standards, it's not a topic that a lot of people get excited about. I mean, but in this case, like when you talk about regulatory or safety concerns, like people could look at that as a loss, as a net loss. Oh no, they're going to start putting rules in place. But I think it's a gain. I think in a sense, not only does it make it a safer industry, but it legitimizes the industry even more, right?
Well, I totally agree. And more importantly, it will save the industry. Okay. Because if there's another incident like what happened in Orlando, the risk is that the industry gets shut down. Okay.
Yeah.
That, one action could be that, okay, all drone shows are banned until we really figure this out. Right. And God only knows how long that takes. So I think it's really, really important for the future development of this industry that something like this happens. And not just in the U.S. I mean, this is an international effort, and the reality is that many of the governing bodies outside the U.S. are also not expert in drone technology, and they don't really know what to do. And what's worse is that their paradigm is, either manned aviation or like drone delivery unmanned aviation. And there's some significant differences between, those things and a drone show. And like safety instructions that might make a lot of sense for a drone delivery drone make no sense for what's happening in a drone show, because you've got like 1,000 drones
in close proximity.
In close proximity. And you can say, okay, you need to land now, terminate the show because of this, situation. But you actually, with that action, may decrease safety and not increase safety, because if you just land all and it's not pre-programmed, then you're going to get a lot of mid-air collisions, and then the drones are going to go out of control, and you've actually potentially made the situation worse. So
that's an interesting concept right there. Like I never thought of that. If you do have to, like if suddenly lightning or whatever it is that could become sort of an instant problem, if that happens, do you like stagger the landing, or how does that work?
Well, it all depends. Many times the safest thing to do is just to let the show run its course. Okay. But if you have to take immediate action, you can, you have a few options. You can return to home. Okay. And we have now certain bailout points in our shows that can be inserted to ensure that can be done safely. So like every minute or whatever, you could have a bailout plan. But then that increases your show file. I mean, they're trade-offs, right? Because you have all these additional instructions. But if you return to home without it being pre-programmed, then your chance of collisions increases significantly. And it may or may not be safe, all depending on like where spectators are and where you're doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, another alternative is you land all, just have everything go straight down. Okay. And because the drones are always in a safe, sterile area and not over people or not close to spectators, that can be done safely. But if you're over water and your drone doesn't float, you've suddenly lost, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars of inventory in the water.
Yeah.
And then the third option is you can cut the engines in an extreme situation. You literally cut the engines and the drones fall out of the air. And again, because they're meant to be in a sterile environment, they won't hurt anybody. But you probably have just lost, again, hundreds of thousands of dollars of your technology, right? So it's tricky. So it's really, I mean, and this is what we're now going through as part of the standards process is trying to think about different scenarios and determine where we can issue, strict guidelines as to how things should be done. But things aren't always as easy as they seem, and a lot of thought needs to go into this.
Wouldn't one idea just be to have separate, whatever you call it, takeoff spots, landing spots? like to basically parse that out so that you don't have 500 or 1,000 drones all trying to land in the exact same spot at the same time in the event of a problem?
Sure, you could do that. I mean, we can have different takeoff and landing locations. We've done multiple shows where things come from, different homes and go back to different homes. So that's one possibility,
Yeah.
for sure.
See, now I've earned my way onto your safety committee already. I had one ingenious idea. So is there anything at all that's transferable from like whatever it is, 100+ years of manned aviation that could apply to drone shows?
Sure. I mean, there's lots that can be learned from manned aviation, and it's I think they're generally two buckets that we're focused on. There's like the technology side, and then there's the operational side. So on the operational side, in particular, there is all this work that has been done on how to operate organizations and crews and things like that, and pilot safety. I mean, this is why often flights get canceled because crews they time out or whatever. Okay, and it's all meant to prevent exhaustion. And as one example, that principle totally applies to drone shows because there is a pilot in command for every drone show, and you want them to be lucid and able to react quickly when weird stuff happens. And many pilots, especially on smaller shows, right? These guys are also driving the truck and loading gear and putting it in place and potentially being sleep deprived and doing a drone show tour, right? And tonight it's Houston and tomorrow it's Dallas and the next day it's Oklahoma City and
Yeah.
whatever. And these guys are working really hard, and their brains may not be operating at 100%, because they're working so hard. Fatigue
Is real.
impacts, if fatigue is real, and
Yeah.
it impacts your ability to make good decisions. And those principles have been well developed in manned aviation, and they're equally important for drone shows. But people don't think about this stuff, right? They in general, the atmosphere has been more like traditional entertainment, and it's like, hey man, we're gigging, and anybody who can go to China and spend a few $100,000 and buy some LED, and then presto, they've got a business. And you can kind of do the same thing with drones. You need one additional piece of paper and maybe some different insurance, but otherwise, people just like that who then just gig like it was an LED screen, and it's not. Right?
Yeah, so I don't want to try and sound smart. I did actually look this up on ChatGPT or something. But do technologies like redundant navigation, geofencing, or aerospace communication mirror like aviation industry stuff?
Yeah, redundancy 100%. I mean, that is like a key principle of manned aviation. I mean, every aircraft has 2-3 layers of redundancy. Geofencing is more of a drone thing, okay, than manned aircraft. Although, essentially, the way air traffic control works is each airplane is in its bubble, right? And nothing else should get in that bubble. And we have a similar bubble scheme with our drones, and not everybody does this, but every drone has a bubble, and nothing else is allowed in that bubble. And if it gets too far outside or pierces that bubble, then corrective action is taken, right? So that's kind of, it's different, but a similar principle.
Yeah. What about things like outdated software or situations where basically there's a mismatch between the hardware and the software or something, and something bails out?
Well, these are all things we're working on now as part of this standards effort. I mean, there have been huge advances in software, and our platform is set up so that we can update it regularly, and we do, and we spend a lot of time and effort on doing so. We use an autopilot called PX4, which is kind of like the Linux software of autopilots in the drone space. A lot of people use it. It has a great community supporting it, and it has had huge advances in the last few years. So it is highly advisable to use a new-ish version of that software. I mean, you don't always have to be the newest one, but you want to make sure you're incorporating recent advances. And so I think the same is true of whether it's aviation or other kinds of technologies, right? I mean, you need to update the software on your computer to keep it safe from viruses and other threats, and it's just good hygiene to be doing so. And drones are no different if you're using something like PX4.
Yeah. I'm sure you've seen it. There was a recent video of something in Asia. I don't remember if it was Beijing or Singapore or what it was, but huge drone show that I believe when the show finished or maybe even during part of the show, there was just everything started crashing and falling out of the sky. And do you know what happened there? Or
I mean, probably GPS jamming. That is a big problem and the big vulnerability of all of these systems.
so what does
Because
that
they
mean,
all
GPS
rely.
jamming?
Well, I mean, this is what's happening now in the Black Sea and other places, in military settings where presumably the Russians are deliberately manipulating GPS data that comes from the satellites to confuse their opponents. And it is possible to buy, pieces of equipment that can scramble or mess up or otherwise, destroy the GPS signal coming down
Ooh.
so that the drones don't know where they are, right?
So people are intentionally sabotaging
Yes.
a
Yes.
drone show? Wow.
It's been lots of this in Asia. We had it happen to us on a show in Germany. I think it happened to another company in the US last year in a show in Washington, if I remember correctly. So, this is like equipment that's bought that people like truck drivers will put it on their trucks so that boss can't track him. Okay. This kind of thing, right?
I can
So this
understand that
technology.
application, but to try and screw up a drone show and get drones to crash, what's the end game on that?
Oh, it's just vandalism.
Yeah.
Right.
Ugh, that is gross. That is
Yeah.
wild.
But that is the weak link of all of these systems.
Well, I would guess that one of the things too that's probably causing problems and causing a need for safety regulations is price wars, right? Like as you push the price down, you have to maintain a level of safety and whatever you would want to call that, like integrity, I guess.
Right.
So
Yeah,
how big a
100%. I
problem
mean,
is
that's
that?
well, that's a really big problem, right? Because our drones, which are built, with safety in mind, cost more than a drone that is built for price efficiency, and that doesn't have the same amount of redundancy or safety features, built into that, right? So, this industry has become very price sensitive pretty quickly, and that's a real issue. But at the same time, anybody in the public who goes to see a drone show doesn't have any expectation of risk. Okay, there's no
Of course.
there's no assumption of risk in their
Yeah.
mind.
Do I need to wear a hard hat,
Right,
to
exactly.
this New Year's celebration or whatever it is? Yeah.
Well, exactly, which is why then it's really important to have at least some minimum level of safety that is set out in a standard that people need to comply with.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, all you're saying is all drones need to be up to at least this standard. Some will still be well
Right.
above that standard, but all of them need to at least hit this standard. That makes a lot
Exactly.
of sense. Yeah. So, I would guess that this is probably one of the biggest issues, and not just on the hardware sort of lowest level or base level or whatever, but also the labor and everything else too. Like what are there any standards in place, like what a person operating or setting up a drone show must have? Do they have to have certain qualifications yet or no?
Well, you have to have a commercial operator permit, okay?
Okay.
And that's stipulated by Part 107 in the US. Um, but it's a bit like going to the DMV and taking the written test there, right? Okay, maybe 10% of the knowledge is actually useful for what you do on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah.
And there is a lot you need to know that's not covered in that exam. Okay. So
Yeah.
again, that is one piece of this standards effort is thinking through what should be mandated and then how you go about doing it. And so for us, it's all about trying to find the right balance. And I also view this as a longer term effort. So right now we just need to focus on like kind of key core elements that we can get consensus on quickly, and like let's get that in place, and then there can be version 2, 3, and 4 where we like go into more detail about some of these things, and I'm sure this will be an ongoing effort, that evolves over the years and becomes more refined. But there is so much that could go into it. So we just need to pick our battles, right? And pick the important key things. But, you know, training and experience and, all these things are really important. And the industry, for the most part, it works on a pseudo apprenticeship system. I mean, much like concert touring, where like you start with doing small gigs and then you kind of work your way up and you get more experience. And but there's a big difference from doing a club show to doing an arena or stadium show, and you don't just go from one to the other. There are skills you have to learn along the way to
Yeah.
make sure that you're competent in what you're doing.
Yeah. And do you coordinate at all with like other regulatory bodies like in Europe or in Asia, God forbid, or anywhere else?
Yeah. So in Europe, there's something called EASA, which is like the European FAA. So we
Yeah.
work with them and have had to get a special approval on our system because we didn't quite fit what they had in mind. And so we were able to get that. So we're approved to fly in Europe with our system, which is great. And then in other territories, we've had to gain approval for doing shows there. And, some are easier to work with than others.
But I mean, as you're with regard to this safety group, this task force, are you working with Europe as well to make sure that whatever you're doing here will also carry over there, or is there a similar group
Yes.
or task force in Europe?
There isn't. I think we're a little bit ahead. There are some things starting to happen, and we are in touch with them and want to coordinate 100%. Okay, but I think things are moving faster in the U.S. So it may be that we're first out the gate, and then we'll see what they like and what they don't like, and try and figure out how to be in sync with them. But
Yeah.
from my perspective, I think it's really important that this is not a U.S. standard. This is an international
Yeah.
standard, and there aren't really, it's a bit like entertainment technology more generally. Okay, what tends to get used in Europe also gets used in the U.S. for the most part. Like these tours, they go around the world, right? And it's not that big an industry, and so it's not like every country supports its own variant of the technology. And here people are kind of essentially doing drones the same, the shows the same way. There's no big difference between how you do a drone show in Germany versus the US. So it makes sense to have
Yeah.
compatible standards.
Yeah, so I guess it's sort of a two-part process where one is that you create those standards and you write the textbook basically, and then secondly is that you work with other areas to mandate it, or even in the US work with the different groups that need to mandate it for those shows, but also in Europe and Asia and Middle East and wherever there's drone shows being done.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, see, I said another smart thing. That's 2 in 1 podcast.
Woo!
This is amazing. I might be out for a record 3 here, so I'm going to try and find something smart to ask you. What about, so with regard to what I just said about mandating, are you already starting to reach out to like event organizers, festivals, at least letting them know that you're working on something like this and that it will be published at some point and that it should be something that they mandate for those or is it too early for
Yeah.
that yet?
Well, I think they probably want to see more detail, but I have been in touch with the Event Safety Alliance.
Yeah.
Okay, I think this is going to be really interesting for them.
Yeah. That makes sense.
That's as
Yeah.
far as I've gotten, but in general, on all this, I have a this is I have an open door policy. Like everyone is welcome to participate. I'm trying to get as many people to participate as possible for the reasons I mentioned earlier, and so. The more industry participation we have, the better.
Yeah. What about insurance companies? Is there in your vision, is there a point where this will be mandated by insurance companies as well?
I would think so because they too are not so knowledgeable about how everything works.
Yeah.
And I have worked hard to reach out to them and try and educate them, but it has not been well received. I mean, not that
Yeah.
I've been rejected, but they just haven't been interested. They don't want to listen. And the insurance rates for drone shows are really high. I mean,
Maybe
it's
that's why they don't
insane.
want to listen. Maybe it's very profitable right now.
Well, it was very profitable. I mean, after this incident, we'll see how profitable it is because they're probably going to have a payout, one would assume.
Mm.
But yeah, in my mind, the rates they charge are not correlated with the risk involved, and then there's no differentiation between safer ways of doing things and less safe ways of doing things. And I've tried to talk to them, but I guess I'm guessing the day will come, but I have not been able to engage them yet.
Yeah. So who pays for all of this?
Pays for what specifically?
Like it's not easy and inexpensive to do what you're doing right now, to build this task force, to get a lot of people involved, for people to fly around, to get to meetings, to do like, is there a budget, or is this all just completely being done voluntarily?
It's basically a volunteer effort.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is it's become nearly a full-time gig for me.
Yeah. That's what I was getting
Fortunately,
at. Yeah.
now fortunately, earlier this year I handed off like a lot of the day-to-day stuff with my partners. So they're now taking care of that and allowing me to focus more on strategic issues. And suddenly safety has become a huge strategic issue, and this is
Yeah.
now my main focus. So yeah, it is a volunteer effort, and obviously any costs are absorbed by the companies that are participating. But fortunately, I mean, there's not a lot of cost. It's mainly time. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I get that. So, how about if other manufacturers, operators, production companies want to get involved with this work? Do they just reach out to you, or is there a name?
Yeah, they
Like,
can
do you
reach out
guys
to
have a
me.
website yet, or anything, or is this just a task group?
We don't have a website, but if you want to join the party, send me an email, standards@vergeaero.com. Um, and then I'll include anybody who's interested in participating in our email list, and they can join the meetings and participate as much as they want, or just observe. Many people just want to kind of be on top of what's happening. They don't necessarily have time to start drafting standards, but
Yeah.
they really want to know what's going on. And so, we're having monthly meetings where we can disseminate information and keep people apprised of where we're at.
Yeah. And I guess the only other thing I would ask about this, unless I've missed things that you want to talk about as well, but people who are listening to this who may not own drone companies or anything, who are just in live events production, is there anything you want them to do after hearing this? Or
Yeah, buy drones. I
so
mean, I'm like the Pied Piper, man. I love drones. It's fun. And there's
drones
there's
are
so much
fun.
cool stuff.
Drones
There's
are
so
fun and
much
cool.
cool stuff yet to be done. And
Yeah.
so I mean, the mission of our company is really not to do shows ourselves. I mean, we did a lot of shows in the beginning because there was like nobody to sell to. We just had to go do the shows to make stuff happen and improve the technology and whatnot. But we are generally trying to step back from being a production company and doing the shows, and instead being a supplier of the technology that powers them. But I want to see more people getting involved. I think
Yeah.
there's still tons of potential, and we're trying to with the system we have, we're trying to make it easier for people to do this. I mean, you still need to do some training and you need to know what you're doing, but I really want more people involved because I think there's still lots of untapped potential.
So if I'm a small or mid-size production company and I want to call somebody up at Verge Aero and get into the drone business, like to do, let's say I'm in a small city of 100,000 people, and I don't know which city that is, but let's say I'm in a small city of 100,000 people, and I'm like, I want to add this wrinkle to our business model and put it on our door hanger. And what kind of money, what kind of an investment, both from a manpower standpoint and a training standpoint, but also buying the hardware and software and everything else? What is that? Huge numbers? Like, give me a round number.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of people, generally the recipe for success is having one point person, okay, who becomes really knowledgeable. And then, they ideally have a couple of people supporting them. But you really want one person who becomes the pilot, is like on site and in charge and really knows the system inside out. Like you don't need more than that. In terms of cost, right? You can get up to speed with a smaller investment like a 50 100 grand and a smaller number of drones, okay, just to get going and learn and do smaller events. And then many of our customers, they start small and then they like add another 100 drones and they add another 100 drones. And we have one like one of my favorite customers is a campground in like Wisconsin. It's Jellystone Campground, okay, and they bought 50 drones and they just had them flying every Friday and Saturday, in their, I think over their lake. And they had like, 5 or 6 different shows choreographed to different
That's
songs.
funny.
And, oh yeah. And it's like the IT guy running this.
That's
Okay.
crazy.
And then they bought more drones and now they're like, putting on drone shows in the area. And they're now like actually a drone show company, going around and doing this stuff. Right. But
Jellystone drones.
it's like anybody
That's
can
funny.
do this if you have a reasonable amount of intelligence. Like you don't need to be super smart. You just need to be, reasonably intelligent and diligent in studying the materials and gaining experience and whatnot. And off you go, right? So I think there's going to be a lot more of this. You think about like weddings and other events, and again, like for some of these things, you don't need 1,000 drones to make an impact. Like we've done parties and things just for fun with like 50 drones, and with the right content, it looks killer, right?
Yeah.
So it all depends.
Yeah, you're not going to want to create like animated movies with 50 drones. You're going to want to do more of a like a fireworks show kind of thing, or a smaller display or whatever. But yeah, I completely get what you're saying. You have to think of them like pixels at the end of the day. So if you want to do some elaborate video, it's got to have lots and lots of drones.
Right.
You need more pixels.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Anything else? Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's basically it. But on a completely different note, I love your
Cool.
enthusiasm for AI. Okay. I
Good.
totally agree that it will change how shows are programmed and become a tool for people to use. And I'll even tell you a little story. We even back in like the mid 1990s, when I was doing lighting consoles, we started dabbling with neural networks. And we had a guy on a project for about a year trying to do what you were thinking about, but we were just way too early. And the product was called the Showbox, okay? And the idea
Wow.
was more for club lighting, okay? Basically to have a box and have it automatically generate interesting looks based on music and other inputs and stuff like that, right? And it kind of we dropped it after about a year of effort because it was just okay, right? It just, it wasn't good enough, right?
Yeah.
But there's no, so I've been thinking about it ever since, and I think now is the time. I think the underlying technologies have finally become sufficiently robust that there is absolutely no reason why this isn't going to get deployed as a tool in show design.
You know what though, Nils? it's an interesting challenge because like a small company, I don't even remember the name of them, but not last year at LDI, but I think it was the previous LDI, they have a show box like what you're talking about, very much the exact business plan that you just mentioned, nightclubs primarily. And this box would just program your show and off you go. And so they put a sign up saying, you know, fire your LD or something like that. You don't need them anymore. And literally they had a lineup of LDs at their booth saying, you know, I want you thrown off the show floor. I don't even want you on this show. You're a disgusting human being. Like just tearing this guy in half. Like I don't know the guy. I don't know the company. It was probably in bad taste, the signage that he put up. But, you know, what I keep saying to people is you can't stop this. You're not going to stop this. It's happening. And so you really need to learn about it. And so I put out a LinkedIn post, I don't know, a month ago or something. And I just said, hey, look, you know, half hour of my time for free. I'll give you a sort of a starter AI course on how you can start incorporating AI into your life and business today, immediately, in a very powerful and rewarding way. And the first strange thing was I didn't get a lot of response, and yet no one in our business hardly uses AI yet, other than maybe your very basic writing an email or something like that. And then I started getting sort of a ground rumble, and people were telling other people or reposting it on their Facebook or whatever, or LinkedIn. And so I've done a dozen of these. It's been absolutely my time spent. You know what I mean? Like no return expected, not charging anything, would never charge anything. I'm not an AI expert. I'm just a heavy user. And, but the value has been tremendous for these people. Like I get people emailing me or calling me back going, you wouldn't believe what I just did. And they tell me the whole thing. And I'm like, that is a perfect use case, you know? And then we'll talk about it a little more. And so it's just funny how slow we've been to adopt such powerful tools to what we're doing. So I just don't see anytime soon, like MA owns 98% of the control market right now. And I don't see them suddenly putting in self-programming desks. You know, that's just not going to happen yet, right? Even though they could, you know,
They could, but what they can do, yeah, I mean, it's just like an effects engine, okay? You know, you give people the tools to make their shows even better, right? But of course, the logical progression of this is that at some point, maybe those tools are completely autonomous, and you know, maybe for some shows you don't even need a designer, right? I mean, that almost seems like an inevitability. But you know, the reality is maybe, you know, with some smaller shows and smaller events and things, right? I mean, there's not a lot of design happening anyway, and you kind of have somebody who's doing it half-time or
yeah,
part-time, and
yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be out of a job, right? It just means it could be better. I
It's
mean, who
evolving,
knows?
it's
Who knows?
changing, it's whatever. And we always pick on the lighting guys and say lighting designers, lighting consoles, etc. But I spoke to an audio manufacturer a couple weeks
Oh,
ago.
100%.
And I said, how long before, you know, you don't need a guy standing in front of house at the console, or you don't even need a console. You know, you just need a box that's storing all that information and changing that information throughout the set list or whatever. And he said, it's there. The technology's there right now. We have products that are coming out that, you know, won't leap all the way there because you got to be careful not to lose market share over this kind of a thing, right? But yeah, I mean, that's the reality. Technology's there. If, like, I don't know if you saw last week that Tesla delivered their first car autonomously, you know, to the guy's house. And, you know, it had to cross all the way across town, going through stoplights and, you know, all the things that a normal drive would have to do. And it showed up at the buyer's house and very safely, you know. So that to me tells me that if you can do that, you can probably run a typical rock and roll show, you know, without a lot of people involved. So, yeah, I don't know. Like, I'm not wishing anybody out of jobs, certainly not, because these are all my friends and certainly my guests on my podcast as well. but I am saying that don't ignore it because I think it's real.
Yeah, and I think most of the people on your podcast would never be out of a job, okay? Because
They're the top of the top.
yeah, and the big spectacles and the biggest events and things, they're always going to need,
Of course.
a creative designer and et cetera, right? But maybe some of the smaller gigs or whatever, where there's not a lot of budget anyway, maybe those are
Those will
natural,
be
applications
the
for this,
easy
right?
pickings. Yeah.
Yeah, or even on the big gigs, right? So certain cues are developed that way, but you still want to stitch them together in an intelligent way, or whatever, right? So we'll
Yeah.
see.
Well, and also some of those things where you're, setting up your show, setting up the rig, addressing fixtures, like all of those tedious things that you have to do every time you start before you actually program a light to do anything. Like a lot of those things need to disappear first.
Yes.
So that instead of spending 10 days on pre-production or whatever, you're spending 1 day or 2 days or whatever it is. I don't know what the actual math is on all that, but you know what I'm saying. So what about drone shows? Like, are you guys getting AI? And I'm sure AI will become involved in safety where it's predicting problems and solving problems before they happen and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think the natural application is creating content. Okay, like really interesting 3D elements, and we've experimented a little bit with it, and gotten okay results. We probably need to spend a little more effort on it, and undoubtedly AI will be used to generate drone
Of
shows.
course,
I mean,
yeah.
we use it intensively to generate code. I mean, that's pretty common all over the place, right? I think even Google. I can't remember what the number is, but a very significant percentage of their code is now generated by AI, like
Yeah,
half,
yeah,
something like that. I
yeah,
mean, a staggering number.
yeah,
So, I mean, it's here and it's happening.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I mean, I think the big challenge is hiring AI coders is so expensive right now. Like when you're competing with the Googles and Open AIs, and like, did you see this Facebook thing, Meta thing, a couple weeks ago, where they're going to pay $100 million for you to leave your job at Open AI, a signing bonus of $100 million. What the hell is that?
Yeah, that's insane.
So, like I've heard people say about the drone business, well, in the military, they certainly have that technology. Okay. Military has this interesting, bottomless budget. Whereas, Verge Aero is a small company. Most of these drone companies are small companies. They're probably sub $100 million companies. They don't have $100 million signing bonuses to hand out to AI guys, So yeah, it's interesting, but cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this, Nils.
You are so welcome.
As always,
Thank you for
I love
having me.
talking with you. I always enjoy talking with you, and we hardly ever do it on a personal level. So just got to get you on the podcast every few years although you seem to be slowing down your work now. So I don't know if you're going to have anything useful for me anymore.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I keep on getting sucked into all kinds of things. So
yeah.
who knows? But hopefully I'll make it down to Florida or Canada at some point,
Yeah.
and I'll stop by.
Cool. Well, thanks. Appreciate you, Nils.
All right. Take care.
Yeah.